So something that I haven't been able to get out of my head recently is that perhaps the way we've done ESL instruction, or really any foreign language instruction in the past, might just be backwards. You see, the way I always grew up is in French or Spanish class or something like that. If you wanted to teach someone a language, the first thing you had to do is you had to teach them like how the grammar works or what the vocabulary means. And then once they knew those core concepts, then they could go and try to actually do something with the language. We still see this very often in our methodology, such as the PPP model, where we present, we practice, and then we produce. And this model comes from this theory that until you've been taught, you can't actually use the language. But what I started realizing is that that's completely backwards from how we actually learn language in our L1 or our first language, but also just how we learn things in real life. Very rarely are we taught specifically or explicitly how to do something and then practice it in a controlled setting and then being told to do it. Usually, we start by just observing something. Like we observe our parents talking, or we observe conversations or things that people say. And we start to pick up on patterns, and over time these patterns begin to kind of embed themselves in our brain, and eventually we start to be able to use those things that we've seen very often. To explain this differently to you, I wanted to talk to you about solving a Rubik's Cube. Now, this is something that's kind of difficult for me, but my little brother is actually a master at this. And sometimes when he's been learning how to solve a Rubik's Cube, he'll start just reminding me of all the patterns that he's learned. So he might say something like, Austin, once you find the white cross, you have to do an up and then a right and then a left inverted, right inverted, up inverted, front, forward, right, turn. Anyway, and he'll start telling me these patterns. And if you're anything like me, hearing someone talk about Rubik's Cube patterns, especially when you're not physically holding a Rubik's Cube, is one of the most confusing things in the world. And so I think about how unmotivating it is and how unhelpful it is in some ways to hear someone talk about how to solve a Rubik's Cube when you don't have a Rubik's Cube in front of you. And it reminds me a lot of how we typically teach language. We tell students what to do with a grammar point, or how a certain tense functions, or what they're supposed to use this vocabulary for, but they're doing all that without actually holding it in their hands. And because of that, they get a lot of information, they receive a lot, but they walk out of our class without really being able to do a lot. Think about how many students walk out of a high school French or a high school Spanish class and say, you know, I learned a lot about how to conjugate verbs, or I learned a lot of abstract knowledge, but if you asked me to actually speak French or to hold a conversation in Spanish, I would be absolutely out of my element. What I started realizing, and what honestly a whole lot of other people in the foreign language business have started realizing, is that we need to change the way we teach. And we need to say that if communication is the goal of foreign language instruction, then it should also be the means of our instruction, meaning it should get the highest priority in our classes. And so I've been thinking of a lot of different ways to do this, and probably the most compelling thing for me is to find ways to begin to contextualize the learning experience for the students in the classroom. Now, especially if you're teaching overseas like I am in China, our students don't have access to as much authentic input as someone like an ESL student in America would have, simply because they're not constantly surrounded in an immersion-based situation. Their classes are probably, in a large part, in Chinese, and most of the time when they're with their friends, they're going to be speaking their first language. And so we've really got to find a way to contextualize our classroom if they're going to have that authentic experience. And so one of the methodologies that's really helped me to begin to contextualize my class is to use something called the PACE model. This has some things in common with the present, practice, produce models, meaning that we're still going to take some time to explain grammar concepts, especially if they are confusing or unfamiliar to our students. And we're also going to give them a chance to really produce and to have a chance to extend and to build on the things that we've been learning in class. But where this model really stands out as different in my mind is instead of beginning with present, where we present some grammar concept or we present some vocabulary or some skill set like that, this model, the PACE model, begins with present, is in presenting an authentic text. So what we want to do is we want to find something, a text that really highlights a skill or a grammar concept that we want to focus on, but it does so in an authentic and a motivating way. So rather than beginning with the concept itself, we're beginning with that authentic text. The A in our model is simply to draw attention to whatever grammar form or structure or vocabulary that we're working on for that day. So we want our students to underline the important words or to circle them or to circle every time you see a past tense word in this sentence or something like that. But we're just finding ways to draw our students' attention to whatever is necessary. The C in this model is co-construction. And this is something that I really like because rather than the teacher just passively pouring information into the students are now working together or in a small group or perhaps with some teacher scaffolding to kind of think for themselves, like, what is the grammar concept that we've been noticing and how is it working in this particular context? And so they're kind of co-constructing their own theory for what is this grammar rule. And then that's where the teacher can begin to say, like, yes, you're right on target. That's exactly how it's working. They can begin to show them other examples of how it's working in the same way. Or you can begin to show sometimes when it doesn't work like that and show them some interesting scenarios that maybe it differs from the way it would work in Chinese or in Spanish or French or whatever their L1 is. But you're co-constructing how this grammar point works. And then the E is the final step, and this part is pretty similar to the present, practice, produce model, but the E is extension. And so this is, we're trying to give our students as much E as possible, as much extension as possible, because we want them to be able to use whatever we've been working on that day in an authentic way, to be able to reproduce it in their own speech, to be able to use that in the same authentic circumstances that we've practiced in class. So that's a little rundown on the PACE model, and what I like about it is it really meets all 6 of our foreign language standards that we're going for. It helps students use their target language for learning. It helps use authentic cultural resources and text, especially in the P, the present part of our experience. It helps us design communicative activities so our extension and even our co-construction of the grammar points aren't simply teacher-oriented, but they're student-oriented. It helps us think about backward design because we think about where we're going and how the students might use this in an authentic way. We even begin with an authentic text and we end that way. And we plan our whole instruction around authentic and backwards design material. We're using grammar as a concept, meaning that they're focusing on the meaning of the grammar points and how this works in a larger setting than just a sentence level, but in a discourse level. They're focusing on meaning before they're focusing on form, and that helps them see like the grammar as a concept. And then finally is this PACE model really gives the teachers a great way to begin to provide feedback for their students at every level of instruction, from present and making sure that they understand the text to drawing their attention to it, making sure that they're focusing on the right things and making sure that they're noticing patterns and drawing their attention to multiple uses of whatever grammar concept within the text. And then the co-construction, making sure that they and their partners in the class is kind of being scaffolded towards the right answer or the right explanation of this grammar point. And then finally, in the extension, we get to see and give feedback to our students as they actually put this into practice. And so it can be a little bit more intensive on a teacher to be focused in every stage of that instruction, to have a specific process for every stage of that instruction, to find authentic text. But what I've begun to see in my classroom is that it honestly is worth it. It makes my class so much more motivating. It leaves me with, not feeling like I'm explaining a Rubik's Cube to students where they're going to hold on to it for a minute and as soon as they walk out the door, they're going to forget everything I said. It makes me feel like they're actually going to be able to use whatever we talk about in class. And ultimately, that's the goal. Hope you'll go and do some of your own research to continue to learn about the PACE model, because when you get better, we all get better. So know that I'm rooting you on this week, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye.